Yeah, the thing that the Cincinnati game that was mind-boggling or mind-crushing for fans is as badly as they played, and forget about the Michael McFadden thing. They could have easily won that game by 17 points, minus the self-inflicted mistakes that they committed in that game. Whether you mentioned the Tim Baldwin fumble, the pick at midfield close to halftime, the getting the roughing the passer after they'd stopped them on a defensive stop. There are just so many things that like 5 easy things you could easily just pick out that completely changed that game. That had nothing to do with Micah McFadden. And then there's that part of it. But so they could have easily won that game and made themselves look taking so much heat off of themselves. And that's the disappointing thing is you're not going to have many of those opportunities as we look through the Big Ten. So many of these teams have improved. Michigan State, much better than they were a year ago. Maryland is better. Even Rutgers is better. You've got a Minnesota team that's going to come in that has been playing well. They've lost Muhammad Ibrahim, and then you have to finish the season on the road at Purdue. So it's going to be even more of a daunting schedule than at first I thought. I didn't realize how much better some of these Big Ten teams had gotten, and I didn't expect the fall off from Indiana.
No, I mean it's really easy to say this stuff in hindsight, but like if Indiana wins that game by hook or by crook on Saturday, it's probably ranked right now.
Yeah, and we're not exactly.
And I think really, I said this yesterday. I don't think that Indiana has somehow started, failed basically its expectations or proved that the last 2 years were some sort of false dawn. Like I think there's been a lot of Indiana fans saying, "Oh, we were just fooled into thinking this team was good." Like that's a ridiculous thing to say. They went to the Gator Bowl, the Outback Bowl, and back-to-back seasons. They were good. Exactly. And they're still good. Now, maybe there are some ways in which they aren't as good as they were because they lost Jamar Johnson or because Michael Penix's injuries have really just started to get the better of them and whatever different things. But I think really more what Indiana's kind of been reminded of this season is that if your ambition is to do more, then look at your schedule and just think, how do we squeeze a bowl berth out of this? Whatever it takes. How do we squeeze a bowl berth out of this? Then it's harder. And, yes, Indiana could have had an easier schedule. They could have played, I don't know, they could have played Tommy Tuberville's Cincinnati, not Luke Fickell's Cincinnati. That's what they signed up to play, at least in theory, when the contract was signed. But and yes, they got handed a tough schedule, and somehow it's getting tougher. But that happens. And if you want to, if I'm not even saying if you want to compete for a Big Ten title, I'm saying if you want to be a serious Big Ten program, every once in a while you're going to wind up with a schedule like this. Talk to Iowa fans; they feel like this happens to them like every 4 years, where they end up playing, a good Iowa State team, somebody else big in the non-conference, and then 2 of the big 3 from the East. This is par for the course if your expectation is that you're not just going to write off every ranked team on your schedule preseason as a loss and then just say, okay, well, if we beat any of those teams, that's a huge bonus, but our focus is basically winning every other game. Then the reminder is that it's tougher. The margin for error is a lot slimmer. And you're right. Like first of all, if the Michael McFadden targeting penalty doesn't happen, and I thought it was targeting, and we can have a completely separate conversation about the rule, but I thought it was the right call. But if he's cleanly blocked on that play and Jaron Handy gets to the quarterback like he does, and it's just a third down incompletion and Indiana gets the ball back, there's a really good chance Indiana wins that game by 3 scores because they were owning Cincinnati at that point. Cincinnati had 1 first down. They crossed the 50 one time before that targeting penalty happened. And that wasn't like for a quarter. That was for nearly an entire half of football. And the offense wasn't great, but it was still playing well enough to be up 14-0. Arguably would have been able to put maybe 3 more points on the board. And then we're talking about a 17-point halftime lead. That is substantial. But in the same breath, even through all the other mistakes, if Indiana punches it in on that fourth quarter drive where they fumble the ball, they're up 31-30 with 7.5 minutes left. And it's a different conversation about a different game. And so the point is, even through those mistakes, like I think what actually made this if I was an Indiana fan, and I'm not, but if I was, what would make this game more frustrating for me is how imminently winnable it was, even through a lot of those mistakes. And the degree to which Indiana kind of cut its own legs out from under. But if I'm Tom Allen, I'm looking at this game and I'm saying, forget Iowa. Iowa was it was a one-off. It was a total non sequitur. Like, Iowa's no longer our concern. This game is what you can be. You had a top 10 team on the ropes at home. You didn't handle one big piece of adversity well enough. We can learn from that. We've done that before. You made too many mistakes. We can clean those up. We've done that before. And if you did that, you would have beaten and possibly beaten soundly a team that was in the Peach Bowl a year ago and has playoff ambitions right now. So if I'm Tom Allen, I'm saying this is how close we are. Everybody thinks the sky is falling on our season, but this is how close we are.
The only thing is, though, that it reminds me of the bowl losses. Both games, the Tennessee game, the Gator Bowl, absolutely, that they should have won, had in their control, and just they snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. Same type of similar reasons of not just simply not doing things. Last year, poor game plan, whatever, but they're not winning games that they should easily win that would create a much better perception of Indiana football. You talk about this perception of Indiana football that a lot of people have, and this continues to perpetuate that, I think. And until they stop losing these kind of games, that's going to continue.
I think that's fair. I think that's perfectly fair. But the flip side is you kind of need the full context of this season. What if Indiana comes back, beats Michigan State and Ohio State at home, which, like, that doesn't look like the most ridiculous thing in the world. Ohio State's not a great team right now, not what we thought they'd be. Let's say they win this weekend, lose to Penn State, and then come off the bye and beat Michigan State and Ohio State at home, and they go to Maryland 4-3, and they beat Maryland. Well, then we're not really saying, oh, same old Indiana. What we're saying is just that Indiana needed a little bit of time to settle into this season, and they weren't given it by a difficult first month, which is exactly what we all thought. Again, like, I understand that what part of what's been jarring for people has been the method of defeat. But if Indiana had lost 17-6 at Iowa and then played the game they played Saturday against, like, if you just wiped all the points off turnovers off the board at Iowa, and then they played roughly the same game against Cincinnati and lost that game, I think you'd still see a lot of the same frustration and fan reaction. And I would say what I've said all week, which is everyone acknowledged in the preseason this was possible. Everyone acknowledged in the preseason Indiana could play well through the first 5 weeks and still start 2-3. But you have to get through an entire season to understand the context of it. In 2014, Indiana went on the road and beat Missouri. It was a huge win. And then they lose Nate Sudfeld and go 4-8. You have to get through the season to understand the context. And I don't think, listen, if we're sitting here and Indiana's like 2-5 going into the Maryland game, then it's completely fair. And that's completely reasonable. That's completely possible. And then it's completely fair to say this season was a disappointment. But I think if you can't say sort of same old Indiana. First of all, I think Indiana, with the success of the last, 4 bowl games in 6 years, I think they've earned the right to say it's not the same old Indiana right now. Even if they're losing the bowl games, they're getting there. Like, there was a stretch of 1 bowl game in 15 years. 4-6 is not the same old Indiana. Second of all, you have to see where Indiana gets to over the course of the entire season before you can say, well, this is just a reversion back to the mean and this and this and this. It has to endure beyond 1 or 2 or 3 weeks.
Dustin?
Yeah, I guess that's the main thing is how likely do you think that is right now? Did you feel like what is the vibe around the team right now that they keep saying they still have confidence in themselves? Is that something that you think that they still have?
I obviously I don't. It's tough to say. When you're not in practices and things, I think there have been some concerning things. Hearing Nick Sheridan, for example, say that turnovers have been an issue since the preseason. That's probably a concern. That they've been working on it, and yet there's still, I think it's 7 turnovers in 3 games, or maybe 8 turnovers in 3 games. That's not ideal. On the other hand, the defense has played really, really well, and it hasn't always shown up on the scoreboard for a variety of reasons, but that defense has shown the capacity to win games, frankly, and I think potentially to win games against Power 5 opposition, Big Ten opposition. If the offense can take 1 or 2 more steps, I think it almost feels right now like that offense is at 75% of capacity basically everywhere. And the problem with that is that if there's nothing that's just operating like a top line efficiency, then you don't have anything that you feel like you can rely on. But if it can get that 75% to 100% in a couple areas, I think its fortunes could change fairly quickly as well. I don't know if it's ever going to be the best offense in the Big Ten, but I think it can be a lot more serviceable than it is right now and a lot more useful and functional than it is right now. I certainly don't think the season's over by any means. I think obviously this weekend is a must win. That should go without saying. But I just think that you've got to get through. We all said in the off season, in the preseason, these first 5 games were going to be rugged and difficult, and it was totally reasonable to see Indiana come through these 5 games 2 and 3 like that. That was everyone kind of agreed on that. And I get that in the moment it's tough for fans to swallow losses. Trust me, I understand. But I think we've got to see where Indiana is kind of the other side of October and to really know for sure, because that's when things are going to get a little bit more manageable. Things are probably not going to feel quite so hectic, quite so out of control. And like I said, if Indiana's 2 and 5 going into that Maryland game October 30th, then fair enough. But if they're 4 and 3, and back-to-back wins against Maryland and Rutgers would get them to 7 and 3, then I think that's a pretty different conversation.
Zach, one more thing, and I'll let you go because I know you got to get going. But if that is the case, because everybody during the games, everybody starts lighting up Twitter about bringing Tuttle in, and I don't know how good of a quarterback Tuttle really is. Obviously, if he was that much better, he would probably be in there. But what do you think that it will take for there to be a change either in game or obviously if they lose this game, if they play badly? But what would it take for that to happen, for there to be a change at quarterback? And I'm not saying that there should be or suggesting that there's going to be, but it's just one of the things that people ask about if the offense is not improve, even though we've listed a line of things that it's not just a quarterback that's responsible here.
I think turnovers would be the big thing. If Michael Penix can't, again, there's not another Idaho on the schedule, even Western Kentucky. I know they're not a Power 5 team, but they're, consistently one of the most competitive and successful group of 5 programs in the country. They're a program that I think, first of all, quietly, they've been better on defense the last couple of years than people think. Second of all, I think they have a really established identity, and I think that's part of what makes them tough. That what they are right now, at least in a very sort of broad brush sense. I understand schemes are different, coaches are different, et cetera. But, kind of their identity right now of just sort of throwing the ball all over the field and all that under Tyson Helton, it is very sort of reminiscent of what they were under, Willie Taggart, what they were under Jeff Brom. They have an identity that sort of the program believes in and buys into, and that's part of what makes them difficult in games like this. And then you start into Big Ten play after this. If Michael Penix, let's say after 2 more games, is still struggling to keep hold of the football, struggling to confidently steer the offense, that's when I think you need to have that conversation. But I think it is not a decision you can rush. That's the worst thing you can do with that sort of decision.